Greetings to those who watch below. As we continue our journey through October and the paranormal, it's time for another long-form haunted experience. Before I get into this though, I'd like to say thank you to Ghost City Shelton, Lefty Kim, Lisa Watts, and Steffi Ray for being those who dwell below. Thank you so much. Also, to make you guys aware, if you check out the creepypasta.com YouTube channel, you'll find that all month long they'll be playing videos only from myself. So without further ado, this is The House on North Street by The Lost Voyage 11. The following is a story I have been wanting to tell for years. This story centres around a home that was in my family for years, and the experiences encountered there occurred to many different family members. I will do my best to relay the events as I remember them and as chronologically as I can. The home was purchased by my great aunt in 1946 and hosted a sort of extended family there. In addition to my great aunt, my grandparents on my father's side, my dad, his siblings, and assorted cousins lived there on and off over time. There was a cluttered front porch that opened up into a dining room. The back right corner of the dining room would contain the entrance to the one bathroom in the house. There were two doors that opened off the dining room, one led into the kitchen and another into a middle living room. There were actually two small living areas leading toward the front of the house. The kitchen had an enclosed back porch that accessed the backyard. It also had an enclosed staircase, complete with a door that led to the second story. The upstairs was a unique layout. The stairs led into a short hallway that opened into a large open area that was used for sleeping. At the opposite side of this room and parallel to the small hall was another hallway. The first room off of this hall overlooked the front porch and street and was the only one that wasn't wired for electricity. The hall led to an attic, and off the back of the house, 3 different bedrooms which all linked together. To get to the third bedroom, which was my great aunt's, you would have to walk through the other 2. It wasn't really designed for privacy apparently. I'm not sure when the events actually started, but sometimes some of the neighbourhood children playing alone upstairs would come downstairs confused, wanting to know who the woman was that was standing at the other end of the upstairs hall. They were certain that all of the adults were downstairs. My great aunt would go up to look, and of course, no one would be there. There was only one set of stairs, and they were in the kitchen, which is where my grandparents would camp out most of the day. It was a small town, and many parents would just kind of watch the neighbourhood kids by unspoken mutual consent. No one thought of kids wandering in or out or remaining unattended in the house if their playmates wandered off. It got stranger from there. One morning, everyone was to leave for a fishing trip, and only my great aunt and another aunt would be staying behind. My aunt went upstairs to be sure the beds were made, and in one of the rooms someone was apparently asleep, huddled under the blankets. When my aunt went downstairs, she mentioned to my great aunt that someone stayed behind, to which she replied that she had just seen everyone off that was in the house. She knew everyone had left. This alarmed my aunt, who went upstairs and saw the bed now empty, but the sheets were rumpled, as if someone had just been in it. My great aunt had been downstairs and had seen no one come out of the stairway, while my other aunt was upstairs. The bed thing seemed to be a recurring issue. Many times after all the other beds were made, they were found messed up again, even with only one other person in the house. My relatives say it wasn't the kids wandering in and out, because the kids always announced their presence, and they could be heard when playing. This also happened after the kids were in school as well. The sightings continued. One day, one of my cousins wanted to know who the woman was upstairs who went into the attic. Of course, another search found no one up there. One cousin stated she had been pushed downstairs, but most of my family said that she was kind of clumsy, so they wrote that claim off. One of the cousins staying there had went to go downstairs to get a drink of water, but as he entered the stairwell, he saw a woman standing at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't recognise her, but when she started to float up the stairs toward him, that put an end to his desire for a drink, and he fled back to his room. My great-aunt would be woken up many nights to find a woman rummaging through her trunk at the end of her bed. The unidentified woman would look up and then fade away. Footsteps would be heard on the stairs at night too. Too many to be discounted as the house settling. Many nights my aunt would come down in the middle of the night and hear the sound of dishes being washed or the floor being swept. The first time she was confused, but didn't question it too much and went back up. The next morning the floor was still dirty and the dishes still in the sink. Many people had these kinds of encounters over the years, and to my knowledge, no one actually investigated the noises while they were being heard. I finally heard years later from a different family members that while they were having these experiences, they rarely spoke of them for fear of being ridiculed, and some just flat out refused to believe what was happening. Finally, one day, my dad, while a teenager, was upstairs getting something from under his bed. His bed was in the big open area. When he turned around, she was right there. It was the closest of the encounters that had occurred to my knowledge. My great-aunt and grandparents were at the kitchen table when he came downstairs, apparently white as a sheet. He talked about it then, but has since clammed up over the years. He described this woman as wearing a purple dress, old-fashioned, maybe like something from the 20s or 30s. She also wore a cameo pin. What scared him so bad was that she had no face, just a dark spot where her face should be. Prior to this, most people had only seen her in the dark, but this was broad daylight. I had heard the story from my grandmother, and fascinated, I asked my dad about it, but he got kind of short with me and says it was so long ago that he couldn't really remember. My Uncle Pete, who was dating my youngest aunt, had some interesting encounters. One night, while he and my aunt were snoozing on the couch downstairs, he felt someone tap him on the shoulder and awaken him, whispering his name. He came to, and saw only my aunt near him sleeping soundly. He caught the movement of someone moving up the stairs. He knew full well that they were alone, and so leaving my aunt, he pursued the intruder upstairs. He saw someone at the end of the hall go into one of the bedrooms, but when he went in there and turned on the light, no one was there. As he turned around, he saw this person go into another room further down the hall. When he got to that room, no one was there. This game went on for some time before he eventually gave up. Another night he came to their house drunk, and though his memory isn't the best, he thought my aunt threw him out into the snow. In the morning my aunt told him she stayed in her room the whole night, and no one else had been home at the time. My uncle swears it was a stern, angry-sounding woman who tossed him out into a snowbank. No one admitted to this incident, and my aunt says she didn't even know he had come that night. In the 80s, my great-aunt leased the house to my aunt, my dad's sister, to have for her growing family, while she moved into an apartment. My aunt woke up one night to see somebody standing over her. She screamed and turned on the light, but no one was there. My cousin claimed someone grabbed him one night upstairs in the dark. Both my cousins state that on more than one occasion they'd seen a man lying on the floor upstairs, and when they attempted to approach him, he would get up and go into another room and lay back down. My aunt and uncle began to remodel the place and knocked out the walls to the downstairs rooms, including the kitchen, as well as moving the stairs from the back of the house in the kitchen to the front in the living room. They were making the whole downstairs one huge open area, and in doing so, found what appeared to be the bones to a hand, which they assumed to be a monkey's paw. They threw them out and didn't have them analysed or notify anyone of what they found. My other uncle had told me that he had knocked a hole in the wall of the room upstairs without electricity and had found another mummified hand in there. He also tossed it without telling anyone. God only knows why. This same uncle one time entered my great-aunt's bedroom while she was still living there and saw a woman standing near the trunk. She appeared to be looking for something in the trunk and promptly disappeared upon being discovered. I did hear that for a while the footsteps on the stairs stopped and then eventually resumed. I guess moving the stairs must have confused the ghost for some time. For most of this time I remained unaware of what had happened at that house. My parents would take us over a lot when we were younger to play, as it seemed to be a popular family hangout when so many people were staying there. This was in the early to mid-80s. I did spend the night more than once, and I know my brother, cousin and I slept on the fold-out couch in the big living room the night before we went to Arizona on vacation. I didn't even start hearing the stories about the place until my aunt and uncle got ready to move and were going to rent the place out. I do remember the bathroom gave me the creeps though, as when I was at the toilet, I always felt watched from the area of the bathtub, but there was never anyone there. One time my brother and I had been asked by my aunt and uncle to watch their dogs while they were on vacation. As we approached the house, I felt like we were being watched from the window of the upstairs bedroom, the one without electricity. We only found the dog up there laying on the bed in that room. This was before I knew it was haunted though. We found one of the dogs had gotten off his chain, so while my brother went looking for him, I remained behind in the living room. I felt watched from the area of the kitchen and kept turning around. Then, as I was watching TV, I felt a brush of air behind me, like someone walking at my back going to the stairs. I shrugged it off as my imagination, but found out later this was a common experience for others. My brother told me years later that the night we camped out in the living room, that he had awoken to the feeling of someone shaking the bed. He opened his eyes to a rather stern-looking man standing at the end of the bed. He was wearing a white shirt and brown slacks, and he straightened up when my brother saw him and turned around and walked into the kitchen. There was some light from the window over the kitchen sink. He whispered to my cousin, asking if he was seeing this. My cousin calmly replied, "Oh, that happens all the time," like it was a common occurrence. I was there, but asleep sandwiched between the two of them. My brother watched this man start to walk straight up into open air, right where the stairs used to be. My brother told me that later that night, I got up to go to the bathroom, and that I ran into the infamous lady in the purple dress. Apparently it scared me, but I don't remember a thing. I do remember that night, but none of that. My aunt and uncle moved out around 1990. They rented the place out and then sold it. I heard that the new owners had admitted to some strange goings-on, but wouldn't elaborate. I've been fascinated with the place ever since. I know at almost every family reunion, someone would invariably come forward with another story about there. It seems many of them kept it under wraps until others came forward, and then the floodgates opened, so to speak, on the various occurrences. As far as my own experiences, they were mild, at least the ones I can remember anyway. I can't say whether what my brother said happened to me seeing a ghost or not really happened, as I don't remember it. I do know some of my memories from my time there seem to be missing, and there are other issues in my childhood dealing with anxiety starting at that same time with no real determinable cause. I can say for sure that for years my dreams were haunted by that house. I would be alone in it, and I would know that she was there waiting for me. The upstairs were her domain. I know that when something traumatic happens to us, if it's bad enough, our minds can block it out. Again, this is conjecture. I have no real proof, but I do think there's something to it. I tried to search for answers. The library records held no help, and even my cousin, who became one of the regular contributors to the Historical Society, couldn't find anything. I know it was built in 1895. I contacted the county historian, who at the time was writing a book about unsolved murders in the area I grew up in. I figured she'd be interested. She researched what she could, and informed me that the house had been owned in the early 1900s by a wealthier individual who rented it out. She came up with a list of names of women who she could trace to living there, in an attempt to find out who the mysterious woman was. She found out, though, that they had all moved out and died in other places. She couldn't come up with anything ever happening in that house. She surmised that in those early days, if a murder or something had taken place, it might have been covered up, as the wealthier owner certainly wouldn't want his name associated with such a scandal. The look of the woman's dress had been of the 1920s or 30s, and it was harder to trace the identity of the various renters in those early years. I even consulted a psychic, who told me that a woman had drowned her children in the bathtub, and if someone dug under the house they would find something. If that is in any way true, no wonder I got such a creepy feeling from that bathroom. There is a crawl space at the front of the house that is accessible. As kids we played near there, and it had kind of a weird feeling to it. In fact, us kids played Witch in the Cellar, ironically enough, at that spot. The neighbours claimed their house was haunted too. The kid who lived there and someone I went to school with claimed to see a fishing pole levitate on its own in his home. The house has changed hands once or twice since then, and had actually fallen into disrepair and been reclaimed by the bank. It's privately owned now, and even though I still visit the area and drive by once in a while, I haven't actually tried to speak with anyone living there to see if they'd noticed anything. Hi guys, thank you ever so much for listening to today's video. If you enjoyed this longer story, make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel. Also, hold on because we are going to get even spookier through October and try my best to find the scariest stories for you to make sure we have something good and terrifying this year. So, until next time, sleep tight.